Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Human Echoes podcast, the show where we review oddball movies, have oddball discussions, and occasionally take questions from you, the oddball fans.
I'm Tony Southcott.
I'm Albert Berg, and I'm just back from vacation, y'all.
Al is still in spirit on a boat somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico.
Even my legs are on a boat still. They're like, although, no, it was actually in the Atlantic. I realized that we were on the other side of Florida where we launched from Jacksonville.
I see.
So we went to the Bahamas.
Nice. That's still kind of Caribbean, though.
Yes, it was. And it was very relaxing. I'll talk about that later. But today we're here to talk about a movie, as we always are, to kick things off. We're talking about last year's movie from Gavin Hood, director of Ender's Game and several other films, Eye in the Sky. And Eye in the Sky is the story of a joint military operation on a village in Kenya where there are some really bad terrorists convening for a meeting before they are going to go and blow themselves up. And it is essentially... It's a one-room thriller with a lot of rooms, if that makes sense.
It kind of does. Like, you're talking about 4 different situation rooms that are all of varying levels of politics going on in the background, but it feels like a one-room thriller, even still.
Yes, there's a lot of people standing in rooms looking at screens, and I think the real interesting thing about this movie is how global it is. I mean, there are people on every side of the globe interacting in this idea. So you have Helen Mirren and Alan Rickman playing their characters whose names I've forgotten in England. They're
Colonel Catherine Powell, and Alan Rickman isn't even listed on here for some reason, even though he is all over this movie. I'm just going to say their
actors' names because that's maybe what I'll remember. The English are the ones who are leading this strike force. They've gotten it together. They're sort of in charge here. They are coordinating with an American team that's piloting a drone, 2 of whom are in the same bunker together, a pilot and a sort of sensors operator, and then one of whom is in Hawaii, like in a different bunker, sort of analyzing the footage they're getting from the drone. You also get a little bit of scenes actually in the Kenyan village where this is all taking place. And it really does a great job of highlighting the global nature of this kind of warfare and the incredibly difficult moral decisions that come with making these kinds of choices. Not just moral decisions either, but also legal decisions, political decisions, all of these machinations together of people who are all legitimately trying to keep the world safe, right? Like there's nobody in this movie that's a bad guy except for the terrorists. Like we don't get to see their point of view. We don't know why they got radicalized. Like, we are assured that they are going to hurt people, that they have been hurting people. That's
they're putting together a suicide vest right now. So it's like, they're going out to kill people, most likely innocent civilians.
However, there are a lot of different ways of looking at the same situation, and you have people who have been following these terrorists for months and months and months, and they have, Helen Mirren has, sort of very pragmatic, like, these are bad guys. If there's collateral damage, that sucks and that will hurt me, and I might stay awake at night, but I will take that shot. You have Aaron Paul, who's the drone pilot, and he's just got there and seen this little girl hula hooping in her backyard, and he's been asked to blow up the house right next to her and knows that there's a good possibility she could be killed.
You have the 60 to 70% range, like they're figuring it out as percentages for collateral damage.
Yes, which I don't know. That's a really impressive, if that's true. And from what I've heard from Gavin Hood, a lot of this movie is based on stuff that they really do. The idea that they could go in and calculate with that level of detail what kind of damage the missile would do based on the structure of the building, based on the walls around, blast radius and everything, and do that in real time as they do in this film, without, they kind of do the fancy computer overlay so you can see things, and maybe that's not accurate, but still...
It wouldn't surprise me, with the way military technology is, even just the way tracking technology works, that they could come up with some sort of overlay, especially because they have so much data on how Hellfire missiles work.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's a fairly well-known quantity, and they do blow up a lot of tests and probably blow up tests in houses and around walls and say, like, okay, what kind of... The military tends to have a lot of data on how its stuff works, but it's just this... It's very much like people calling back and forth on the phone, to the point where you can tell the movie, production-wise, probably didn't cost that much to put together, because nobody needed to be in the same room at the same time. You know, Helen Mirren was never on set or even filming at the same time as Alan Rickman. She filmed all her stuff. Alan Rickman's in a room filming all his stuff, going back and forth with these phone conversations. Aaron Paul's in a different room filming his stuff. And so you have all of these very disparate actors, both in a like literal sense and also actors in the global stage, coming together trying to make this decision. And you get it's almost comical. I got a little shade of Shin Godzilla from this, Tony, which I know you haven't seen yet, but Shin Godzilla has a lot of people referring up the chain for decision making, and bureaucratic red tape and people trying to make decisions. And in Shin Godzilla, it's portrayed as a negative thing, right? Like, we're bogged down with all this red tape. It's almost a like a very not liberal. What's the word for libertarian? Like, we just need to shoot some missiles at this guy. Like, if we had one guy who could just say, "Go shoot Godzilla," we would be all good. But in this, it's a lot more nuanced, because you do see that these people, despite the fact that they are, they do have the power to, fire these missiles and things, they do have to answer to the law. They have lawyers in the room with them answering questions and saying, are we within our jurisdiction? We've been approved for this mission, but the mission has changed, but there's these other parameters, but we're in a friendly country, but there's civilians nearby, and all of that stuff just like works together to make this a very tense thriller in a way that it could very easily not be. This teeters on the edge of potentially being dull. You can see the dull version of this movie when you're watching this, but Gavin Hood really does a great balancing act here and pulls it all together to make an incredible story.
Yeah. Plus, it's a movie that takes place in real time, so they're trying to build that actual tension there. There's no jump cuts that are going to force the perspective or anything like that. You're just sitting there watching how the military would have to designate if they're going to kill this girl for a higher value target over the course of an hour and a half.
Right. And you do get all the sides of this argument. And they're all equally well represented. The idea that these terrorists are going to go and blow up actual people more than would be hurt by this strike is a very real and very legitimately voiced concern. And yet you do also have a voice in the room, in one of the many rooms, saying, I would rather them kill people than us kill innocent people trying to stop them from killing innocent people. And that voice comes across as just as real and just as genuine and having just as good a point as anybody else. And it's a movie that doesn't give you any answers. There's never a moment where somebody comes down and says, and that's why drone strikes are the best, or and that's why government sucks and drone strikes are terrible, y'all. It gives you all of these threads, all of these really legitimate threads of people who take their job seriously and have a very important job to do, all the way from the drone pilots, in his bunker in Nevada, to the Secretary of State, visiting China. And none of these people come off as callous or uncaring. The Secretary of State to some degree, because he's not personally invested, but he has a good point. Yeah. He says, listen, they're on the target list. Like, you're not, I understand civilian casualties and everything, but we've never had an opportunity like this. You got to take the shot.
Yeah, he was called and asked within 30 seconds. He doesn't know the whole situation. He just knows there could be civilian casualties. And it's cold in his answer, but it sounded like a very Secretary of State answer. It's like, you mean you've got 2, 4, and 5 on our most wanted list right there, and you aren't going to blow them up? Like, just do it.
It felt a little bit American, but not like cartoonishly so. He wasn't like a Michael Bay character.
Yeah.
And then but you have him, like, you have the top brass, the prime minister, I think, at some point weighs in, you have the secretary of state for the US weighs in, and the order goes all the way down, and then you have the guy who's actually going to pull the trigger also voicing his objections and saying, listen, no, I don't think this is lawful. I want you to double check these numbers. I want to make sure that we're within our bounds as far as collateral damage. And he's able to say no to this order that's run down the chain from the highest people in 2 different lands.
Yeah, the way Gavin Hood's character in that is like, you just threw the rule book at a colonel. It's a bad idea.
Is that Gavin Hood playing the Aaron Paul Superior?
Yeah, he plays I can't remember the actual. Okay, it's right here. Director Gavin Hood also plays the role of Lieutenant Colonel Ed Walsh. So if you've ever wondered what Gavin Hood looks like, he's in the movie.
He does a good job. I mean, he's not like real super. He doesn't have a ton to do, but I certainly wasn't like, that's the director sticking himself in the film.
Yeah. Well, he has a kind of a military look to him, so like he just blended in. He wasn't a sore thumb in any sense of the word.
Yeah, and there are, I mean, looking this up in the sort of trivia section, there are some little factual inaccuracies, like the way that the point of view doesn't really seem to move, even though the particular type of drone they're talking about here would have to circle the compound. The flight time of the missile, I think, extended a little bit more than what it would have been to increase dramatic tension, but having read up the amount of research that they did do on this, and the idea that someone like Aaron Paul, an actual pilot of one of these things, could say no if he thought that there was a chance that this would legitimately be, a war crime or something that he could be called up for later, and yet he can't, like, he has to say yes at some, like, he can't necessarily contradict a direct order if it is legal, but he has the right to ask if it is legal. All of that stuff working together, and the amount of research that went into it. The script was already apparently incredibly well researched, and then to have Gavin Hood come on and like sort of add to that and make it as nuanced and as realistic as possible. And to a point, by the way, if you're watching this movie, Gavin Hood in several interviews pointed out, not every drone strike is like this.
No.
This is a specific, like, the idea of we're going into a friendly country, there's all these other mitigating factors. Obviously, there are some drone strikes where it's really obvious, where they are, where we have jurisdiction to operate, and where there's not all of these other factors, and we can just sort of give the order and go in, and we don't have to bounce the ping pong ball all up the chain and back down again and back up again to make sure that we can do this.
I was listening to Jocko Willink's podcast talk about some of the things that went down whenever he was SEAL team commander in Ramadi, and a lot of that stuff was just basically like, oh, we've spotted them in this building. It's basically crawling with opposition forces, and it's gonna get turned to jelly. Like, sometimes it's as simple as that. But they always still verify like 3 times that they're in the right area, that they're getting ready to do it with extreme prejudice in a situation that actually deserves it. Otherwise, they're gonna go in on the ground and do it. So, like, I'm sure there's a lot of times where, like, they might have to double check a couple things, but they're not going to be going through this every time there's a civilian near, especially in a full-on war zone. Instead of, was this in Kenya, or I thought it was in Nigeria, but I think
I read it.
Right,
one of the things I was reading mentioned Kenya, and so that's what I latched onto.
Yeah,
I could have
not
been wrong.
actually filmed in Kenya. So
okay. They're all, but not actually taking place in Kenya, or the filming didn't take place in Kenya. I'm not sure what the production details were, if they found some other African place, or, I mean, you could have filmed this in a lot of sort of poorer countries. I can imagine this being filmed in Mexico or someplace like that, but it works just fine. It's not like there's anything really jarring.
Yeah, there's nothing that brought me out of the movie knowing that it wasn't made in Kenya. Like, it just worked with that. Also, like, we've talked a little bit about the cast. This is a very, very good cast. This is Alan Rickman's last live action film. Helen Mirren has always been good, even back whenever I believe she was a Bond girl. Like, Aaron Paul's always good, especially for the kind of quiet, like, sort of desperate.
She played M for a while too. She became like a Bond woman.
Yeah. So I've really enjoyed the cast for this movie. It cost about $13 million. It barely made more than that in theaters. I'm hoping that over time it'll kind of recoup some of those other costs.
Yeah, it's interesting too, thinking about Gavin Hood, right? Like, his track record is what, like Ender's Game. I mean, I like that movie okay, but it was not super well received. X-Men Origins Wolverine, like another one that I did not hate, but many people did. And then some other stuff that I'm not. Rendition looks like it's kind of on the similar type of theme as this, about overseas actions and what the difficulties of sort of the war on terror. But I have not seen that one. I'm not saying he's a bad director, but this really seems like a breakout kind of movie for him, and I think it probably helps that he had a really good script, obviously, and that he was. I mean, you say 13 million. I think probably a lot of that went to the actors. You do want somebody like Helen Mirren in this that you can put on the poster and say, "Hey, a Helen Mirren movie or an Aaron Paul movie," or kind of draw people in. But it's obviously, you can tell that they like there's not a lot of like explosions or like big set pieces that you're gonna have to spend a lot of money on. As we mentioned, there a majority of the movie is people in rooms looking at screens, and somehow that manages to be still tense. But it's not a giant type of a blockbuster kind of movie.
Yeah, but you still get some really good action moments out of it as well. Like whenever you've got the guy on the ground trying to go in and buy the bread from the girl to get her away from there.
Is that the dude from Captain Phillips?
I'm about 90% sure it is.
Because his face is super weird looking, and
Well,
the guy's
it's the high cheekbones and everything. I'm about 90% sure. I'm going to look that up while you comment on
okay.
that.
I'm gonna be racist if it's not, like, because it'll just be
That
like,
was
"You
my
think all
first-
black people look alike."
That was my
Not
first
all
thought when
black
I
people
saw
look
him.
like that guy looks.
Yeah, his name is Barkat Abdi, and he was in Eye in the Sky and Captain Phillips, so I'd say you're pretty safe with that assumption.
Okay. Very good. By the way, he does a great job too. Like him being outside of this compound, like he's the one of the few people who's on the ground in the country working to bring these people down, like right outside the compound in an area that's heavily controlled by these sympathetic militia members to to these terrorists. Trying to get and there's a lot of drone action. Obviously the main drone is this Reaper drone that flies pretty high up and has the missiles and stuff, but they also have a little hummingbird drone that they're able to operate out of a van, and then he sort of like walks into this area, fakes being a bucket salesman, and brings this little beetle drone, which again apparently are based on real technology.
Yeah, I don't know if that technology is actually realized yet, but I've seen a lot of specials showing that they were developing it. I wouldn't doubt that the hummingbird one is there. I'm not sure if the beetle one is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is.
For military, like if you're willing to drop $1 million on something, or more, like I could imagine that being a multi-million-dollar piece of tech that this guy's carrying around, which
In a pack of cigarettes.
Yes, and I think if you spend that much, you might be able to get something that good at this point in time.
Yeah. Plus, those specials that I saw where they were developing those micro drones was about like 5 years old. So if they were developing it 5 years ago, they'd probably finished developing something. The people over at DARPA are spending their money to actually get product.
Yes. And he was great, and there's a whole chase scene with him and the little girl selling her bread and, counting down, trying to get all the bread sold before they leave. And I mean, there's just so much tension ratcheted up in so many different ways. I know there was a point where I was like, we're only an hour into this movie. Like, they're calling for the strike now. We're going to spend another 45 minutes figuring out whether or not we're going to do this. And they did, and it worked. I was a little bit skeptical that it was going to work, but it absolutely did.
Oh, like every time that Aaron Paul got close to having to pull the trigger, you're just kind of freaking out a little bit. Like, it's just I don't know. I got way more tension from this than I have from any movie we've watched for a while. It's kind of like the Hitchcock style vibe where it's just like, it's coming. Something's going to happen. And like, you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. But every second is just fun to watch.
I was going to say regarding Aaron Paul, I almost felt like his performance was a little bit more on the weepy side than I would have preferred. I not criticizing him. I think that if you cast Aaron Paul, that's kind of what you're going to get. But a little bit of that took me out of the movie where I was like, I don't know. Like, I think that there would be a lot of inner conflict from somebody operating that kind of thing And you do hear from him that he's never actually pulled the trigger before, which is, I think, an important, like,
At
it
least not on
definitely,
a Hellfire missile. Like he's
yes,
probably done like a lot of training and done all that, but to
to
be the
actually kill
trigger
somebody. I
man,
mean, like,
yeah.
he's always just been surveillance. He joined up to pay for college. He's in the safety of the U.S. where, he can sort of keep his, probably more idealistic vision of what war is and could be and all this stuff. And now he's faced with the responsibility of pulling the trigger. I'm not saying it's like it didn't necessarily take me all the way out of the movie, but I would have liked maybe just a slightly more, like, not handshaking, tears coming out of his eyes. I'm really gonna have to do this kind of performance. It felt a little bit maudlin, just a little bit. And again, not, it does not ruin the movie in any way. But if it was my choice to make, I would have gone with something a little bit subtler, an actor that would give you not that, but still the conflict on his face. Because I think a lot of times soldiers do have those conflicts, but you can't easily see them, right? I mean, they're generally, if you join up and you're in the military, you're a tough guy, you have a lot of ego and you have a lot of macho kind of stuff going on, and you're gonna act like it's no big deal, as much as you can.
So you're saying if he would have been a little bit callous or maybe just a little bit hesitant, and then all of a sudden, right when he's about to pull it, being like, okay, we're gonna reassess this, like it might have had more impact. That
It just seemed almost like unprofessional. It seemed him letting his emotions get that visible felt like it was something, just out of the ordinary.
yeah, because if you ever watch like combat footage or drone strike footage, I've seen a fair amount of it, and it's always very, very cold and technical for the videos
Yeah.
I've seen. And the times where I've seen it go completely wrong, like some of the stuff that was released to WikiLeaks from Chelsea Manning, like you hear them kind of trying to justify the things they're talking about. Like one where it actually did kill a kid, they kept saying, no, that was a dog. It's like, no, that was very, very clearly a small person.
And there's another angle to this too, coming from the Aaron Paul thing. I mean, he gets super emotional, but if you think about it, there is something to be said for the idea that he's insulated, right? Like, yes, he does see the little girl. Yes, he knows that it's a little girl, but there is an element, and I wish they would explore this a little bit more. I've heard Gavin had sort of bring it up in interviews, but there's an element of that. This is almost like a video game for Aaron Paul's character. He's got a joystick and, a screen and pushing buttons to make things happen that he's never going to feel, that he's never going to actually physically come close to experiencing. And if you had almost gone the other way with that character, I understand that it really was very effective for him to push back, to see both ends of the whole spectrum, to see like the grunts essentially on the ground, wrestling with us emotionally, and all the way up to the Secretary of State and those guys, sort of their decision making and how all of those different decisions come into the play. But if there is, I think, something to be said for the detachment that being behind a drone brings. And that's maybe the one thing that the movie doesn't really hit very hard, is that this isn't looking at somebody and shooting them in the face. This isn't seeing them as another human being and taking them out. This is something that you can sort of stand behind this wall of calculations and screens and decisions and lawyers that, I mean, somebody in the actual battlefield does not get that, that sort of that time to make that decision. If you're actually in the thick of battle, hopefully they train people, here's what's legal and here's what's not. And it is great to see, hey, there actually are some rules in place.
There's culpability. If you screw up and you do things that are overzealous and end up getting people killed, you will be held accountable.
Right. But with the drone, it's a lot. There's so much more literal and psychological distance. It's like, how you can, get really angry at somebody driving in traffic and scream things and yell that you would never yell if they had cut you off, like on the street, walking along the sidewalk. That's not, we have even something as simple as being in a car makes us feel like we can shed some of our humanity, and being a world away from something I think could also result in the shedding of the humanity. And I understand the direction that they went with the script. I'm not criticizing that direction or saying they should have made a different movie, but I think that there is an interesting angle to explore that this movie did not. Of
I think that they could have
have
really
that
done that
distance.
with the side character that was next to Aaron Paul. Like, if you had the person that was in charge of the sensory equipment just kind of looking at him like, dude, what are you doing? Like, instead of her being also kind of weepy and out of it, if she would have been just there doing the job because she's experienced with this sort of thing.
Yeah, and also if thematically, if you had cut together something at the beginning with somebody playing a video game, right? Of shoot, and I know a lot of movies I think have done this, but juxtaposing what we see, the violence that we can experience through virtual worlds, with essentially the push of a button versus the real violence of war. I think that there's something that could be said here, and I think a lot of this is coming from the fact that there's a book that I read that was very formative to me, a Terry Pratchett book called "Only You Can Save Mankind," which explores this in a different angle. He saw Terry Pratchett initially saw footage of the Gulf War and how that there was so much of that war being conducted from behind a video screen of like, here's a missile launch, and we're looking at this, and we've got video of this, and we've got and he thought about between that and the sort of culture of video games, which was very much in its infancy at the time, how that it's easy to depersonalize, and made this movie about a video game that turns out to be real in a sense, and what happens if you start empathizing with the people behind the screen, and how difficult is that. And I guess I just really want to say I want a adaptation of Only You Can Save Mankind, guys. This was a good movie. I want that movie too.
And I feel like they did try to touch on that at different points. They showed like they dropped the line, we don't you tell us when to go to war, we're just here to fight it. Like, so whenever it comes down to the point where it's not the prime minister, it's one of his main people is having to make the decision to do this, and Alan Rickman's character is kind of laying into him because like
He
everybody's
really
just
doesn't
like
want
going
to make
up the
that decision.
chain. Yeah, and like it's very understandable. That felt very real. That a guy that not necessarily a war hawk doesn't want to make that decision. He's going to push it off on somebody else.
He was maybe the only guy in the movie that I felt like I was a little bit annoyed with. I was like, dude, like you're here. Like if you don't want to do it, then say no.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do it, then make your call. I understand that it's hard to make that call, but you're in charge here. Stop pushing it off on somebody else. That was the one guy who I just I felt a little bit annoyed by. I think
he also wasn't there for a drone strike. He was there to watch a capture.
That's
because
true.
We're talking about 2 British citizens and an American citizen, like inside this house, and that's what also makes it more complicated. Because we, as a nation, we went through this with I believe his name was Anwar al-Awlaki, like a radicalized guy in Yemen that was an American citizen, and we just blew him to Kingdom Come. And there was a lot of discussion, like, can you do that to American citizens legally? So like they're thinking about the fallout from that as much as they are for the girl. They're saying like 2 British subjects are here. Can you put a death sentence on them just because they've become radicalized without due process?
It's tricky, man. It's a whole tricky. And the great thing about this movie is it doesn't have like a answer. It's not saying this is right and this is wrong. And I think that it would be disingenuous to have that kind of movie. I think that having a movie that brings up all of these angles and all of this discussion and shows you where everybody on this, sort of spectrum is coming from is a great way to foster discussion. And, there was people from anti-war sides of things saying, this is great, this movie's amazing. And there's people in the military saying, man, military guys really need to watch this, so they have an idea of what it's really like. And if you're getting both sides of that argument kind of like praising what you've done, I think that's something pretty incredible.
Yeah, especially coming from the writer Guy Hibbert, who I looked through his list earlier and I didn't see anything I recognized. Like the way they were able to put this together with this director, with this writer, they really went above their abilities that we've seen before to make something that was kind of special. And by the way, this movie is on Amazon Prime right now, so if you have Prime, you can watch it.
Yes, that's how I saw it. It was good. I really, despite the fact that I was tired from coming back from my cruise, Tony, I enjoyed watching this movie. We got a question sort of related to this, did we not?
We did, from Mr. John Jones. He asks, Given the arc of morally complicated elements of tactical warfare in the last 1,000 years, as described by hardcore history, what elements do you think will push ethical boundaries of tactical warfare in the next 1,000 years?
I wonder, the definition of warfare itself is changing so much, and they talk about that in this movie, where the general played by Alan Rickman has a sort of a real problem because of how much nuance there is. He wants sort of a, a MacArthur style war where you guys tell us to go to war and then we go fight the war. Like, get out of this with your politics. And you're like, what are they going to think? And it's understandable why he would feel that way. But on the other hand, it's understandable that like there's very real dangers that of people seeing what you do and reacting to that. We're talking about, we're not, I mean, I guess we've been fighting different types of ideologies all along. Nazism and communism and stuff have always been sort of ideas in general that we were fighting. But there was also a country that you knew you were fighting against, or a block of countries in the case of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. Here, it's less about a specific country that's causing this problem and more about, okay, you have a large number of people who believe some version of this religion. There is a version of this that you can slip into that eventually leads to you killing people. How do you conduct yourself in a way that does not encourage more people to go in that direction and hate you and feel like that you're somehow the evil that your imam says that you are, or not? I don't know if I've said all those words correctly, but the idea that we can cause radicalization through, I mean, if we strike somewhere,
Well,
if
that's
there
always
is
been one of
civilian
the
casualties.
that's been one of the bigger critiques of the drone war, because as precise as it is, it still is not that precise. Like you're talking about usually 20 casualties for every one target that you're going after. Like the averages aren't that good. And that if you're trying to stop the spread of Wahhabism or any other sect of radical Islam that's actually willing to take up arms against nations, or even against their own nation, in trying to kind of take over like the Taliban did in Afghanistan, like you're only giving them fuel to that fire. Like they talked about it in this movie, even that killing one person wins them the propaganda war more than that bomb going off in a mall somewhere and killing 80 people. That'll radicalize people against the radicals there, but British forces killing one girl might actually do the exact opposite in that one section.
Yeah, and in fact, it might if let's put the spin this way, if they allow them to go and blow that weapon up, I mean, people don't want to go to a shopping mall and be in terror of being blown up, and they're actually might be less likely to accept your ideology under those circumstances. Do you gain something by letting the terrorists do their thing and show people how rotten they are?
Yeah, it's kind of like how ISIS isn't doing themselves any favors in the Western worlds with what they're doing right now. We're not even having to intervene as much in the entire worldwide community as against them.
Yeah, so that super. But what I was gonna sort of segue into, the original question was, what in the next 1,000 years, what will warfare look like? And I think the next 1,000 years is way beyond the scope.
Yeah,
of
the
what I
next
can
like
say.
30 years of warfare is kind of beyond the scope of what we can predict accurately. Especially after, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the new Hardcore History, which was about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's
Yeah.
it's fascinating where it's gone, because it's gotten to the point where you have devastating, complete destruction of the entire species. But it's also gotten so much more precise that compared to like the bombing of Dresden or things like that, that civilian casualties have been dragged down so much. Like you look at World War I, World War II, like what that did to civilian populations. We've got it down so much, but every single life seems to matter more because we can actually see it and feel it because of news coverage. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I was gonna go in a little bit of a different direction, because we've gotten away from, not completely away from, the idea of all-out war. Obviously that could still happen, but armies on the ground, bigger, conflicts, seem to be becoming more of a thing of the past as we progress further into the 21st century. Hopefully that'll continue. I know that there's a lot of political upheaval, but it still seems like, no, we don't want to go to war with Russia, and Russia doesn't really want to go to war with us, right? So like the big powers don't really. There's so much more to lose than there is to gain by actual all-out fighting. That like that kind of warfare. I'm not going to say is gone, okay?
Yeah, it's
Because
definitely
human
not
history,
gone, but it's like
it
China
seems like we
depends on
could get further
us.
away from it as we go on.
Yeah.
And especially as we're able to hopefully, I mean, one of the things that the Trump presidency is a whole knot of different things, but Trump has talked about America first and trade deals and things like that. One of the things that trade deals that don't directly benefit us, like let's say you have a trade deal that sends jobs overseas. Well, that sucks for people who lose a job. It does. But if you increase the standard of living in another country, if you give people something to live for in Indonesia or China or Vietnam, wherever, any of these places, right? And I think people with a life to live are far less likely to end up blowing themselves up and trying to kill other people and trying to get into these kind of conflicts than people who live in misery for a lot of their lives. If you have no hope, if you have nothing to live for, then you're a lot more likely to be willing to go into one of these kinds of wars. And so there's things like trade that can sort of benefit you when you bring everybody up to sort of a decent standard of living in the world. If you can bring other countries up, then maybe they're less likely to want to lose that in a war.
Yeah.
That obviously is not a direct answer to the question, but I was also going to say information is becoming a weapon of maybe not war, but politics. There's the whole Russian hacking scandal that went along with the Trump presidency, and support Trump or not, it is interesting, the idea that, and it's not new either. All the way back with JFK, I think Russia like really wanted him to get in, really supported his candidacy. I don't know how much actual substantial influence they were able to have.
Supposedly they had some people on the ground like spreading propaganda against Nixon and things like that, but it wasn't like that's just standard campaigning in a weird way.
Yes. But it feels like that there's the kind of war now that'll be for ideas. And not necessarily a war, but if you can convince people of your side, if you can manipulate the facts, if you can manipulate the news and the way information is coming out, or make somebody look bad, all of that kind of stuff. And I don't have any specific idea of what that's going to look like going forward.
I've got one specific example of where that actually happened to halt a war. Like, you think back whenever you first heard that in Syria they were using sarin gas, that was the red line in the sand. That was where we were supposed to step in and full on intervene. And when people on both sides of the aisle, both in Congress and across America, were like, no, we're not getting into another war, you saw the entire war machine like kind of fall down from that. Like, it's still there, but public opinion and knowledge of the situation was enough to actually stop people from wanting to go and do that. Like, I can't think of another time where we were pretty much on the cusp of going to war and people just said no, and the government actually backed down for it.
Well, right. And just today, there was new information out of Syria that came out about how they're horribly mistreating some of their prisoners and torture. Okay, mistreating is just a terrible understatement. Like, literal torture, like mind games and executions every day in some of these prisons, just like killing them off just because they're prisoners and they can, and the Syrians can do that, and those kinds of things, I think, do sway public opinion, but it also, hopefully it can be the kind of thing that'll goad Russia into saying to Syria, hey guys, like, let's ease up here, because I think even Russia doesn't want to. Nobody wants to go to war with Russia. Like, Russia, we just don't want to go fight Russia. Okay, let's not do that. It's really sucks that there's these bad things happening, but it would be just, the like compounding of negative outcomes would be even worse if we decided to go in there and say to Russia, hey, you guys, knock it off. And Russia decided not to knock it off. Hooyah. No. Like, that's just not cool.
But yeah, as far as extrapolating outward, I think as far, like, we're going to try to keep making it more precise so that whenever it comes to actual warfare, we're trying to get just targeted people trying to break the wills of various groups more than we are trying to wipe out armies. That's already been happening, but I think that's going to get more accurate as total information becomes a reality. And there's always going to be people fighting total information, but it's also getting harder and harder and harder to fight that. So
we've been really heavy on this episode.
Yeah,
Tony.
it's been a little bit heavy, but that's what happens whenever you watch a movie that is heavy like this.
I think it's time to talk about some trailers this week, Tony. It's time for trailer talk.
Trailer talk.
By the way, this will by no means be exhaustive of the trailers that came out this week. The Super Bowl happened, and that was, wow, good game, by the way, Tony.
That was an insane game. No, I'm not happy with the way it turned out. I would like. I've been in a
like New England.
I hate the Patriots, and I was wanting Atlanta to be like the good guys that finally got their championship after like 40 years of kind of having a mediocre franchise with a few blips of greatness. Like, I thought this was their year, especially when they were up 28-3 in the third quarter. Like, but there's also something about seeing actual like greatness that feels like it could have been written for a movie, because it's almost too outlandish to have somebody come back from that sort of deficit, force overtime, and win. It was also the first Super Bowl that went into overtime. So there was a lot of interesting things. It's one of the better Super Bowls I've ever watched, even if I hated the outcome. And sometimes you just can't argue with like legitimate greatness. Yeah, I will always troll people that Tom Brady is not as good as Joe Montana or John Elway, but I'm not really able to prove that. I'm just saying, like, you know, it's the pass interference era where you get free first downs almost every time you throw the ball. So, yeah, those guys did it better back in the day whenever you could molest receivers.
Okay. I did want to say, I felt like the Falcons put up a really good fight.
Yeah, until like that fourth quarter, and then they got in their head like, oh my God, Tom Brady's going to destroy us.
I felt like they got into their head, hey, we're up 25 points, like in 3, like there's no way they're coming back from this. All right, guys, just sort of like coast in. And for some reason, the Patriots found it in themselves to just like punch hard. I heard a lot of people.
That's their coach. Like, their coach, Bill Belichick, is possibly the best football coach that's ever been. And I know he's been involved in more of 10 out of 51 Super Bowls. Like, if you count his assistant career and everything. So, like, they could almost name the trophy after him at this point, considering he's won more than 5. And it comes down to discipline. Atlanta just started letting stuff go, and the Patriots somehow kept their composure and kept coming back.
I felt like, I mean, there was a lot of talk afterwards about, and I'm not a big football guy, but I kind of know a little bit about sports, talking about all of the yardage that they gave up with their holding stuff. But I really felt like they were trying to be overly aggressive to throw the Patriots off their game.
Yeah.
Sometimes that strategy can work. You know, sometimes you can get in people's faces and throw, I mean, my terminology is basketball. So, you know, throw the fouls and, you know, sort of let it go overboard a little bit and knock them off balance. But the Patriots just did not let that happen.
Yeah, because one of the only proven ways to beat Tom Brady is to get in his face, like, over and over again. It's how the Broncos did it last year. Like, Von Miller had an average of like 1.8 seconds to get to him, and he was on his back like the whole game, and that actually got to him. But in the second half, they actually blocked for him, and he was able to do his thing. So you're definitely right that sometimes you go so aggressive. I actually had that happen with my own football career. Like, back in junior high, my coach was like, I want you to jump off sides 3 times in a row and just bash the center in the face because he's slow. Like, as hard as you can, just hit him illegally. Because he's going to fumble. It just didn't work out
for him. I felt like it was nice to see. It's really great to go to watch a Super Bowl game like that. I was on a boat, by the way, at the time, which was even nicer. But just and realize that both teams are playing to the absolute best of their abilities. They're trying. They got strategy going on, and just the one team managed to be better. It wasn't like, oh wow, those guys really dropped the ball. I didn't feel like the Falcons dropped literally or figuratively dropped the ball.
a historic choke that will be talked about for ages.
Okay.
So like there's a little bit of like how good were the Patriots versus how bad did the Atlanta choke, but it comes down to the Patriots just being god tier right now, and it sucks.
But let's let all of that lead us back to the trailers.
Yes.
We're not actually talking about all the trailers that aired in the Super Bowl. We saw a couple more that came out this week that we got a little bit more excited about, but we will start with a couple of the Super Bowl ones, starting with your top 10 pick, Tony. We're not doing 10 of them, but I sent you my list and you said, don't forget Stranger Things season 2. Not technically a movie, but there was a trailer for it.
Yep, and basically Netflix dropping $5 million to remind you that Stranger Things 2 is coming. And that's the first footage we've seen. We saw a few stills of them in their like Ghostbusters uniforms, so we know we're going to get a Halloween episode out of it. It's actually coming out on Halloween, so we get to binge later this year. But you get to see like some big old things in the sky, and it feels Lovecraftian, and there's so much cool stuff happening. And they open up with the Eggos. Like, as soon as I saw the Eggos,
it was
I was
gonna
like,
be an Eggo commercial.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be like sort of a retro, like, remember when we did this, and now we're doing this. And then to like actually go into Stranger Things was a great sort of twist, because you're geared in the Super Bowl to expect a commercial, right? Like you're looking for, okay, what's the angle? You know, you're watching a lot of pretty great commercial content, and they kind of zagged when you thought the commercial was going to zig.
Yeah.
Which was just great.
You expect them to be selling waffles, but instead they're selling sci-fi.
I went through this trailer, no lie. Like I downloaded it this morning because I kept seeing little blips of stuff. I went through it frame by frame looking for extra information, and there's not much, unfortunately. Like there's some parts if you watch it in real time where there's like static comes in, and I was thinking like maybe there's like something hidden in there or like some things. The only thing that made me think there might be something more to it was there's like a little blip where there's these 6 or 7 lights sort of across the screen, and it's sort of staticky and you don't know what that is. I kind of wanted to try to unpack that. I didn't do like a real deep dive, but man, there's a lot of really bad trailer breakdowns on YouTube that I started watching and could not finish. So, but it was interesting. The music hit obviously just kind of got me all excited again, even though that music has been stolen from somewhere else that I forget. It's not literally stolen, but there's another Film Crit Hulk link to something that's like, play this for somebody and don't tell them what it is, and they'll say it's the Stranger Things music, but it's not, because they ripped it off. But yes, it has me excited. There's not a lot of details here. Lovecraftian stuff. Levin's back. You know, nothing really. We're still in the 80s. They're still pulling those nostalgia heartstrings. So we'll have to see. Hopefully we'll get like a full trailer in the next, probably around the summertime, I would say.
Yeah, get that full 2-minute thing so we actually have a little bit of an idea of what's going on in the season. But it was just fun because I didn't expect it, and I was just hyped all of a sudden. That was the one commercial we actually paused and rewound for.
I didn't have a DVR because, again, I was on a boat. Next up, we have the Red Band trailer for Fist Fight, which up until now, I have to say, has not been a movie that I was very excited about. Like I didn't get the angle, Tony. I knew that Ice Cube was going to beat up scrawny
Charlie
dude
Day
from Pacific Rim. Thank you, Charlie Day. I knew that like that was the premise, that they had been challenged to a fist fight, but I didn't know what. Like some of the humor had been funny. Especially with is Amy Poehler in there?
That's not Amy Poehler. That's Samantha Bee from from The Daily Show.
She's great. Like she has a lot of really great lines. But I didn't like, other than sort of her being funny, I didn't know where they were going with it. And this Red Band trailer really excited me because it made me think like, oh, this isn't just like a comedy about these two teachers having this falling out. This is going to be like a commentary about the failing public school system and what it's like to be a teacher in one of these like really rundown school districts where the kids don't care and nobody has any money for anything except for apparently a fancy coffee machine. And Ice Cube starts out, the first couple trailers just like, why is this guy being such a dick? And then you realize that it's because he really cares about the school and he's frustrated because everything's going to crap, and maybe maybe there's something more here than just Ice Cube being a jerk and Charlie Day like having to fight him. Maybe.
Well, it looks like Charlie Day cost him his job too. He's packing up his desk at the end.
Well, I think they were like, I think he was going to lose his job anyway, but it looks like Charlie Day sort of like weaseled his way out of also losing his job.
Yeah.
And Ice Cube was frustrated with that. Although I could be wrong. Obviously, when he says we can work out our differences like men, he's like, what differences do we have? It's like, you have a job and I don't. That's what difference. I love that line. That and when he says you can tell it what to make, and he's like, coffee.
I'm also a huge fan of Tyler Perry, so seeing him do his thing is awesome.
I didn't realize that was him. A lot of great. There also Tracy Morgan's in here.
That's Tracy Morgan, not Tyler Perry. Excuse me.
Oh,
I was thinking of Tracy Morgan because he was like, I look like I'm like Minion. Just everything.
Oh, because they got all the yellow paint on. Yeah. Now who's racist, Tony? Now who can't tell black people apart? What?
No, I was thinking about Gone Girl and how he had done stuff in there, and I was like, that wasn't Tracy Morgan. That was. Yeah.
I could see him popping up in this though.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a underprivileged inner city school. It's entirely possible that there would be like more than 2 black teachers.
Yeah. But it did. This one actually sold me on wanting to see it. I was kind of like, this could be a crappy comedy. I'm not really into it so far. And then, like, you actually see Charlie Day. You get to see a little more of Christina Hendricks, which is always going to help me get to a movie. So yeah, it was a definite improvement. And anytime you get a Red Band trailer, you can actually see what the level of humor is going to be. You can tell it's a little more juvenile, but it's also going to be. It's going to be slapstick and funny in a lot of ways, and it just looks like there's more of a story there than they were actually showing.
Yeah, I think they could have put more of that story in the Green Band trailer, Tony. I don't think there's a relatively creative editing things that you can use to cut out the swears that could have gotten into a little bit more of, hey, this is why this happened to begin with, and I would have liked to see that more. But this trailer definitely I took it up a notch. I think is vastly superior to any of the other trailers we've seen before. We haven't talked about them on the podcast because they were just kind of mediocre, but I was really excited about this one. The next one we have to talk about on my list is Life, the trailer number 3. They dropped like 5 trailers this week, Tony, but
specifically trailer number 3. If you're looking on YouTube, it's the first one where you actually get to see some things about the characters. You get to see the development of the monster and basically the situation where it all goes wrong.
Yeah, and that was the thing that I think really worked. You mentioned the characters, right? Like all the other trailers have just been like, we're in space and bad stuff happens, and this gives you a lot more specifics of. And not a ton of stuff, but like just at the very beginning, you get like a great sense of rapport with these guys. They just take 15 seconds to have dialogue of like these guys working together and being fun friends. And, you get the care hooks in your heart, and then it shows you the monster, and they give you more of the monster in this. They show you more of like where it's from and what it is and how it's doing its thing, and not in like a spoilery way, at least not that I could tell. I mean, if you break it down shot by shot, maybe you could be like, I think this probably happens later in the movie. And
some of the only things I didn't like is how much destruction you see. But they also have to sell
that's
the
probably
movie, so
closer to the end of the movie.
Yeah,
but I expect that to a point. Like it's not like I'm gonna be going to the theater shocked. Like, wait, the space station blew up or crashed or something? No. I thought they were going to be fine and get away. I mean,
I just like seeing that in like the actual movie, but it's still what it took to make me think that this will be something different and a little bit better. But it's really
no details of like who lives and who dies.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main, like, you don't know how it's going to go down. You don't know if they're going to defeat this thing. You know that it's going to get chaotic, and it feels like a cross between Alien and Gravity.
Yeah, it really does. Like you start seeing that this could have been like they drop that this is what wiped out like life on Mars, or that they think might have wiped out.
Which is a little bit of a silly plot point.
Still, it's fun to watch, and they're upping the stakes. It's easy to see Ryan Reynolds as a hotshot astronaut. It's easy to see Jake Gyllenhaal as like the nerdy engineer type. Like it all just worked.
Next up, we have the first full trailer. Or was it a full trailer? I guess it's the second trailer, because you had the first intro trailer to Pirates of the Caribbean 5, where we met Captain Salazar. But this is the first trailer that we really get to see what is going on in this world, a little bit more of what these guys are like, what the pirates are like, what not a ton of story about like what's at stake. We just hear somebody say the dead have taken control of the seas, and then a great zombie shark shot.
Yeah.
What?
The only problem I had with the zombie shark shot is that it looked like it had ribs, and sharks are cartilage, and it just wouldn't quite work like that. But
It's magic. It's
yeah,
a magic zombie
it
shark.
still looked cool. Like, it really did look cool. And I really enjoy Javier Bardem as a undead pirate. I think that'll be cool. I haven't seen any of the pirate movies since 3. I'm not sure if I'll be going to see this one, but this looks better than the last one that they put out, like Black Pearl or whatever it was.
I am of the camp that the first one's great. The second two are good. I know a lot of people hate the second two. I really despise the fourth one. And as someone who is apologist for the first 3 films, it feels like this is more so than 4, a real direct sequel to that, because we have Will Turner coming back. We have potentially stuff with his son, although that's not really in this trailer. But you know, the story seems to be going along with those characters a little bit more. Jeffrey Rush, I think he was in 4, but I didn't care. And it's doing a lot of exciting things, and it seems like, at least in the advertisement, they pulled back on Captain Jack, which Captain Jack, I contend, for this franchise is amazing seasoning, but he cannot be the whole movie. I don't think 4 worked because they did the Cars 2 thing and put him in there like Mater for Cars 2. And this, it seems like it's pulling back, but still having him in there because he's a great character. You just gotta use him in moderation and have him sort of be around other people that aren't as crazy as he is.
Yeah.
And that ship, the way that the I think it's Captain Salazar's ship, like the giant saw blade action thing, that's like half the reason I wanted to talk about this, because that's just so cool. This is like spikes coming down and cutting other ships basically in half. Wow.
That ship is fascinating. I hadn't, like, I saw it, but I wasn't actually like as interested as you were in that particular moment until you brought it up, and then I was like, that was pretty cool. And then for some reason they're all allowed to run on top of water. I don't get that, but whatever.
Well, they're ghosts.
Yeah.
Potentially, or something.
Well, that could be, because Bardem's hair is always like floating like he's underwater.
Right, and you had that bird at the very beginning. If you notice, that bird has part of its leg missing. Like, not like there's a chunk taking out of it. I mean, like, from the knee down to the ankle, there just isn't a leg there, but he's still operating as if it is.
Yeah, and
so
he's
whatever
also
curse
like bony and everything.
logic, yeah, whatever curse logic they're operating under does not obey the laws of physics.
Well, I was just thinking that the first movie, they were walking at the bottom of the ocean, and that was like a really cool scene where you just see all the skeletons walking down there. And that makes more sense that if they are indeed like kind of undead skeletons, that they would sink, but if they are ghosts, then they should be able to run pretty easily.
I love that shot too, of them running on the water and like running above. This is one of those types of trailers that shows you all of the cool looking stuff in the movie, does not give you an indication of whether the movie's actually going to be good, but it sure did make me want to see it. We're going to wrap things up for this week. We're going long, but I did want to get this last trailer in, Tony, because it's a little bit different. It's not the Super Bowl type. It's not a big budget. I mean, it might have a bigger budget, but it's a movie called Headshot from the guys who made The Raid and The Raid 2. And it has flavors of Old Boy in there, like this sort of this big epic revenge flick like an amnesia plot line where he's been shot in the head and doesn't remember, and he meets this girl and like she's his whole world. I hope they don't do too much Old Boy, but
Yeah.
It looks awesome.
Well, I think that to go too much Old Boy, like they would have had to brainwash her and everything, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, let's not spoil Old Boy for people. Some people really like that twist. I thought it was just super weird, but some people dig what happened more than I did. So, but it does, if there's that, like him and his dad, like the idea of his dad sort of being this super crook, and you get the idea that him being amnesiac, he is going to find out, I think, at some point that he did a lot of bad stuff with his dad. And he's going to have to face the fact. I mean, that would be the best twist. I'm not really a twist, but sort of reveal for him to have like, oh yeah, you were rotten before you got shot in the head and you're a bad person.
And also, if you guys don't know anything about The Raid, essentially you're looking at one of the best action movies put together. Like some of the best sequences of martial arts you'll ever see in any movie. And they're bringing that hard in this movie. And it looks like you get the gunplay, you get the hand-to-hand martial arts, you get everything you want from the raid in this movie if the trailer delivers. This one actually looks like it has more story to it than the raid, because the raid is essentially a video game of the bad dudes on the top floor get there, level by level by level.
The raid, I have not seen the raid yet. I love the raid too. I only watched it once though. I'm really disappointed because I really enjoyed. And first of all, where's the raid 3? Because the ending of the raid 2 is like, what?
It's probably in the works, considering those movies have done very well from what I've seen.
But I really enjoyed that, and honestly, it didn't, like, this one didn't seem as much actiony as the raid and the raid 2. Not that there wasn't action, not that there might not be action in the movie, but the trailer wasn't like completely reliant on that. There was a lot of
they're actually establishing characters this time. They're worried about story. So if all of a sudden these guys that can make these incredible action movies can also make a compelling story to go along with it, make you care about, like, the girl that's in it, and make you care about this guy that was a terrible person before being headshot. Like,
possibly. We don't know. I'm just saying that seems very likely to me.
Yeah. So I'm excited for it. Like, you also see the moment where he starts to remember some of the things he did, where somebody smashes a bottle on his head and it just kind of jars some things back together for him. So I think he's gonna remember that he was either like a mob boss or a gangster or something. And I just love this visual style. It's dark, it's kind of brooding, but it's also like it wants to clearly show you the action. It's not trying to hide behind shaky cam. It's just putting everything out there with skill.
Yeah, also great, like, literary illusion with him being named Ishmael.
I was wondering about that too.
Moby Dick thing going on.
What do you think he's searching for? A real life?
Oh, his dad.
Oh, okay.
I think his dad is his Moby Dick.
All right, that makes sense.
But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong.
It would make sense.
Maybe it's just a coincidence.
Could be. Well, how many people from, like, it's either Thailand or Indonesia where this is made are named Ishmael?
Probably not many. Although the girl does give him the name. Like, that's not his real name.
Maybe she really
his real name is
whales.
probably Baby Killer. You know? And he's like, oh no, I killed babies. We're just writing this movie ourselves today. We just make
his
our
real
own
name
movie.
is Eco, so.
Okay. Well, I think that is going to have to do it for this week. I didn't get to talk about my vacation, even though I'm in my vacation garb with my sunglasses and my no headphones, Tony.
If you want to go long, you can give us the 5-minute thing, or you can save it for the dirt block.
I was on a boat, and it was great. I'll say that. Like, just the chillest. Just go on a cruise, people.
You also
glutton up.
You also didn't get to talk about the serial killer in your town.
I'll save that for something else.
Right.
That story's ongoing too, so he hasn't been caught yet. He's just driving around shooting people and stealing their cars.
That's messed up. We'll get more details on that later. Be sure to catch the dirt block, because it might be the final two.
By the way, if your boyfriend's a serial killer who killed his previous girlfriend, I'm gonna say that's a bad life choice.
Yeah.
It's just like but we'll go back to that. But look up the Boyette killer in Milton, Florida, and you'll find out more about that as it unfolds. Maybe he'll be caught by the time this podcast is released. But the cruise that I went on was amazing. I ate like a hobbit, Tony. It was like 5 meals a day. It's like, oh, well, I woke up. I'm going to go to the breakfast bar.
It's like,
now it's a little bit later in the day. I'm going to go to sit-down breakfast. Now I'm going to go to lunch. Now I'm going to go to mid-afternoon meal. Now I'm going to go to nice sit-down dinner.
And then you're on 11sies for desserts.
It's good stuff. It's so good.
Next week, we will be watching Snatch. But first, I need you guys to go to humanechoes.com and click that Become a Member link. Members get access to the bonus podcast. Go and listen to the goddamn bonus podcast. We've got samples of it. It's good. It's fun. It's awesome. Become a member. Get that in your inbox every 2 weeks. You will not regret it. You will love the bonus podcast. So become a member at humanechoes.com. Don't make me yell at you anymore. Just do it.
I don't know why he's yelling so much. But you should go listen to the sample stuff if you're not already a member. And if you're a member, thank you. And you make this wheels roll.
Yep.
And this ship float.
And click on the Amazon link if you're buying stuff at Amazon. We get a cut.
And next week, as Tony said, we're going to be watching Snatch. Tony promised by the end of the month we would do it. This was not a Valentine's episode. There will be Valentine's stuff on the channel this week, though. So check out our YouTube channel for all kinds of love-themed vidges.
Yep. Got to get that love in there. Anyway, talk to you guys later. Have a good day.
Have a good one.